I want to let you know is that we have a series called Headlines coming up, and we do kind of two really, really large, but outside of Christmas and Easter, we do two really large message series a year, and this one is a big deal. We're calling it Headlines because if you notice, the Bible is really thick. I don't know if you noticed that, and you're like, where do I start? What are the most important parts? So we've created a series called Headlines. We want to give you the elevator pitch spread out over a bunch of different weeks so that by the end of that, you know exactly how to talk to people about God. If you're a Christian, or if you're a non-Christian, you say, hey, now I know what to think about. In fact, we've dedicated a video to this. Go ahead and check this out.
Hey, you go to church, right? Yeah. I have a question. Whoa. You've given me a lot to think about.
You should check out LifePoint.
Okay, maybe I will.
See ya.
See ya.
Man, she is good. I need to take notes from her. She did it in an elevator. I love the music and that. It's super fun. So we think this series is just such a big deal. We really think, and I said this last time, I said, man, if you never go to a church service again and you go to this entire series, as a Christian, you'll probably know more than 95% of all other Christians. And if you're a non-Christian or part of a different religion, you will know exactly what it is you would say yes to if you decide to commit your life to Christ. And we think it's such a big series. We actually did a compendium class. I'm going to be teaching that over the entirety of the series. It's on Thursday nights. You can register. I think we're already 75% full. And if all of you wanted to go, less than 5% of you can go. And so I highly recommend you register online. So today, if you notice, I'm up here with a bunch of different people. You guys want to introduce yourselves real quick, and then I'll go over some of the guidelines?
Hey, my name is Dwayne. I'm the communications director here.
My name's Tanissa, and I'm the First Impressions Director.
My name's Jimmy. I work over in the student ministries.
My name's Kyle. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and usually myself or one of the members of the teaching team get to be up here, but this series, we've been asking questions. In fact, our series focus through all this has been every answer deserves a question, and it seems kind of backwards that you think every question deserves an answer, but in this series, we're basically saying we come in to some questions about God with an answer preformed, and so we want to question why we think those things. Well, how do we come to that conclusion, or just like what's the effect of thinking that way? And so this has kind of been our series focused. Every answer deserves a question. And so through this series, we've actually been answering your questions. So I want to set up this message real quick because I think in order to get the most out of this, there are a couple guidelines that'll help, and they'll be on the screen, but I'll just summarize really quickly. The first one, we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. We have about 6 today. This series is not only for you, it's by you. All of the questions have either been texted in or asked on Facebook, so this is the stuff that you guys wanted to know. You may disagree with our answers. Part of it is because we may have a different worldview. Our worldview is through the lens of God, and so we discover what he says is good and what is not through the Bible, and we're actually going to talk about the Bible today. We want to engage with and how to talk about difficult subjects, and then most of our answers can be short, though that's not going to be today. And then lastly, we'd love to engage with you in dialogue outside of this message. So after this message, you can come up and ask questions. We'll invite you to do that, or if you just want to see us in the lobby or during the week and go to coffee, we'd love to do that as well. So the first question I want to ask actually is what's it like to be a Christian as a young adult now? My son lets me know that I'm not young all the time. He tells me no, I am now an old man. So 36 is the cap, just to let you know. And so I'm not a young adult anymore. And so what is it like being a Christian now as a young adult? I mean, it's different now than it was a while ago.
Yeah, I have no idea what it was like to be a Christian a while ago, but I can speak for right now. And I think for me, what really defined being a Christian was how I interacted throughout my whole life. It wasn't just about what we did here at church. It was how I was an example of Christ, or I wasn't an example of Christ at work, at school, in all of those places. And that's, I think, what really defined me as a Christian, as a young adult. But that's also one of the hardest parts, is realizing that you're a representative of Christ.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's really important to represent well. So the hard part for me about being a Christian today is that it feels like Christians have a bad reputation that we somehow got over the years. Mm-hmm. And it also feels like we're somehow in our culture it became understood or believed that if somebody disagrees with you, they must hate you. Or if they believe something different than you, they must hate you. And that's just not true. And so I feel like I just need to be really careful about what I say and how I say it to people so that I don't give them the impression that I hate them. And as a Christian, if I hate them, maybe God hates them. It's tricky waters. But one of the good things about being a Christian today is that there is so much information readily available. And so I can, if I want to hear from a certain kind of speaker, I might look up a sermon or look up different blogs of Christian moms and things like that. And so it's good to have that stuff just at my fingertips.
I really love the part that you said about how if you don't agree with someone, then you just automatically hate them. And that's just such a natural piece of our culture right now, and it's so difficult to work with just a lot of different people. I mean, I used to work in hospitality, so I had to be very careful what I said. And being a Christian at this point in my life, there's been groups of friends I had to slowly walk away from, and it was because I was being put in very hostile positions of them screaming at me, "You hate us, blah, 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 blah." And I had to just slowly realize, all right, this is yours, this is mine. I'm not going to make you believe what I believe. If this is what you want to choose, that's fine. And it's been really interesting especially the last couple of years, because it's crazy where people are like, "Oh, God took me places," and I'm like, "No, God will literally take you places." Like, I have such a different, not just lifestyle, but really life. I have different people that are more than just like, "Hey, you should check out this verse, it's really good." They're like, "Hey, are you doing okay? What's up? What's wrong?" And before that, it's just not what the case was.
Yeah, and from my observation, especially for young people today, is they've already said some of these things, is that there's a lot of information available with the invention of the internet, which is a good thing, but it's almost like information overload. It's like, should I believe everything on the internet? Obviously not. And so how do you sift through the stuff to find out what's true? And then also just truth in itself is attacked today. People think there's no such version of truth, or there's a version of it. There's not an absolute truth. So how do you talk about God and other things like that? And then also, as they already said, we live in a culture where it's really hard to disagree with someone and be civilized at the same time. Like if you just ask people about what their favorite baseball team is, I mean, that you can start a fight right there. And so not even talking about God. So this is really difficult. But I'm glad we got some good questions to get through today, maybe to help talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, so my question kind of starts with a story from when I was in 7th grade. It was in biology class. I'm sitting there, first biology class, really. I'm learning about cells and things, and we get to the part about evolution, and I'm sitting there, and the teacher asks everyone to raise their hand if they're a Christian. More than half of us put up our hands, and we're like, yeah, we're Christians. That's what we believe. And he immediately starts, persecuting us and saying, "Oh my gosh, you guys are so dumb." Those were his words. And he had his master's degree. We're in 7th grade, just to throw that part out there. And he's like, "So who wants to defend their faith?" And no one puts their hand up. And I'm just like, "Oh, great. It has to be me."
Of course, yeah.
And then it became my goal, I'm going to take this teacher down. I don't care what you have. I'll figure it out. And this was before the iPhone was invented. I'm barely a young adult, I realized that. But in 7th grade, we had Google. So I'm sitting there in class, and he's just like, "Well, let's go." And I'd flip the question on him and say, "Actually, how about you tell me what you believe, and we'll go from there." And so he starts off with the Big Bang, and he's like, "Well, this is where the origin of everything existed." And earlier in the class, he had called me dumb for just believing that the earth just existed always, or something always existed, like God. And so we get to him telling me about his story, and he's like, "Yeah, these two atoms hit each other." And I'm like, "Hold up, hit the brakes. Where did those atoms come from?" And he was just like, "Well, there's dark matter and those." And I was like, "Well, where did that come from?" And he was just like, "Well, they just were." And I was like, "Dude, you just called me dumb for believing that something just could always be." And so we get on this long back and forth of a 7th grader trying to band together the rest of the class to take down this teacher. It was pretty fun.
A little too excited about that.
But I guess what my question is, can creation and evolution be compatible?
I hear 7th grader 1, teacher 0 in that. I mean, that's just awesome. And if you're a teacher, we love you. We're not picking on teachers or anything like that. What I love also about today and the fact that he gets to tell that story is that in this series, we've just been kind of asking a question and answering it. And today we get to kind of hear there's a reason people ask these questions. It's not just curiosity, it's a story or something that happened to them. So the answer to this question, up front is a qualified yes, as long as we kind of qualify some terms here. And so there's a lot of technical stuff that I'm going to talk about real quick. I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can. There's a couple different things I recommend. There's a book called Stealing from God by a guy named Frank Turek. It's really great. Him and Norman Geisler also write a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Full disclosure, I was an atheist, so I love these books. It's helpful in describing things. But I just want to do 4 important questions in this discussion real quick. What kind of evolution? And so macro or micro, these are very different. Macro means going from one species to the next, maybe from a fish to a land animal. And micro evolution basically means some sort of morphing within a species to help it evolve a little bit better to its environment. And so the second one is actually proven. So like certain birds, have evolved a better beak or better claws based on the geographic area that they live in. So microevolution, totally provable, easily. It's a common ground for us to talk about. And then macroevolution, not so much. In fact, there was something that most scientists, Christian or otherwise, have termed the Cambrian explosion, happened about 500 to 600 million years ago. And basically what that means is things came fully formed. They didn't go from one thing to the next. We kind of had no fossil records, and then all of a sudden we had full of life. So it's called the Cambrian explosion. So from a macro level, I would say that there's not a good case for that. The second thing is, what best explains life? There used to be a question that says, hey, prove that God exists. And after a while, people started to say, hey, it's not just proving God exists. Can you prove he doesn't exist? And so then they started to talk and frame with question around what best explains life. And so there are lots of different ways to think about this for the context of our conversation. Is there a survival of the fittest, where there's this no force behind it, it's totally random chance, and everything just kind of happened? Or is there an intelligent designer behind things? And because things happen and they look like there's a design to them, is there a designer behind all of it? And so what's interesting about this is that the Darwinian theory is actually still a theory. Sometimes we take that off and we just say it's true. And so a lot of times we forget that it's actually a theory. In fact, Charles Darwin himself believed in God, and he said, someday the fossil records may disprove what I have theorized here. And so far, the fossil records have indeed disproved that macroevolution is not as much of a viable thing as most people thought. And then the third one, what happens in the end? So if you take your beliefs, whether it's on one side or the other, to its zenith, to its peak, what happens? And so when I was an atheist, here's what I did. I said, look, if I believe in macroevolution, that everything just happened by chance, there's no reason behind it, and we just kind of descended from fish all the way to people, there's no purpose in anything. In fact, lots of atheists today, which I do really respect them for, are consistent with their beliefs. It means that there's no center for morality anymore. And so many of them have gone on record to say there's no difference between waking up in the morning, driving your car, and committing genocide. They're all the same things in terms of what your preference is to do. And that's a really scary thing. And so one of the things that helped me is if Christianity is true, it means I get to live forever. It means there is a right and a wrong. It means there's a justice and injustice in this world. And it means there's a God who cares about me. So just based on its end, I wanted to see if Christianity was true. And then the fourth one was, what do we bring in? Excuse me. Everyone has beliefs, including scientists. When they have a hypothesis, they have a belief about something that goes a certain way. Christians have beliefs too. We all believe something because of someone. And so everyone has a belief. When you believe in the evolutionary theory, you have a belief because you can't prove it without a shadow of a doubt. So these are kind of four big things in this discussion, but it could probably garner more time. Highly recommend you pick up the book. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's my turn. I'm like, yes, I agree with
yes.
you.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. So my question comes from just my experiences in the world and things that I've seen around me. And I've noticed that there's a lot of messed up stuff messed up stuff that happens. And we wonder, or I wonder, who's to blame for that? And so just like a funny example is like if I spill coffee in my car and my son's football helmet is in the front seat, I'm like, how dare he leave his football helmet there? He's the reason I spilled my coffee. And obviously, he's not the reason I spilled my coffee. And then when bigger things in life happen, like something that just seems unfair, maybe a child is hurt or a child passes away, I wonder, like, who is to blame for this? It's not the mother's fault. It's not the father's fault. Who did this? And I think that's a common question. And so the question is, if God is omnipotent, shouldn't he receive credit for the bad that happens as well as the good?
Yeah, it's a great question, a really easy one. Appreciate you asking this one. Thank you. I mean, this is a big deal because so many people have this question. It takes a bunch of different forms. Some people say, why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? And there are a couple of ways off the bat to tackle this problem. One is a philosophical way. It means, how do I think about this? How do I think and act about this? How do I prevent evil? How do I think about it when it happens? And then there's the personal way to think about this. How do I react and how do I experience this? One time I did a funeral for a really small boy, and his mom, I'm sitting with her and a bunch of friends in their house, and she said, "Why did God take my child?" And so that she's like, if he's really that way, is he really worth worshiping? And my best answer for her was, God didn't need him, he didn't take him. There is evil in the world. God's not responsible for that. And so that's kind of what I told her. But there's this famous problem about how to deal with this. And so it kind of goes like this. This famous problem is kind of in 4 parts. If God is all good, then he would prevent evil. If he is all powerful, then he could prevent evil. If God is all knowing, he knows about evil, but evil still exists. And they think that because of those first 3 things, that the conclusion is, therefore, either God is not all good, he's not all powerful, or he's not all knowing, or maybe he actually doesn't exist. And there's a few fallacies in here. One of them is that because God exists, that he would prevent all evil. And that's not necessarily true. Is that when God created human beings and angels, he gave them a free will. He says, in order for you to be able to love me, you have to choose whether or not to love me or not. And so you have the option to not love me as well. And so when that happens, people commit evil. And so many times when I was an atheist, when something bad happens, I would look up ironically to the God I didn't believe in and talk to him. I don't know why you do that, but you do that. God doesn't exist, but I hate his guts. It doesn't even make sense. And so I would say, how dare you allow this? And I really should have been looking horizontally and say, how dare we do this? And so really evil has come into the world and we are participants in that. And the thing is, that once I became a Christian, I understood that God actually had an answer to this problem through his son, Jesus Christ. So the tension here is, how are those two compatible? Well, there's a couple different things. Free will is obviously a big deal. And there's also how we talk about evil. Is it subjective, meaning is it based on what I think is good? So I hate blueberries and I don't like the Los Angeles Dodgers. Neither of them are evil in itself. And if you're a Dodgers fan, I will pray for you later. But anyways, what I'm saying is there are things that I don't prefer. That doesn't make them evil in itself. Then there's something called natural evil. When something happens, if an earthquake happens and takes out someone's house, or a flood happens and people lose their lives, is that God's fault? Is he interacting in nature in order to cause that? And I don't think so. And the third one is an objective evil. And what's interesting is when people talk about the problem of evil, it means they have some sort of notion of what good is. It means they go, this is wrong. And the only way to understand when something is wrong is if you know what's right. C.S. Lewis is quoted as saying, how do I know what a curved line looks like unless I know what a straight line looks like? It's a big deal. And so when people talk about evil, it's actually a great argument for the existence of God, not the reverse. Mm-hmm.
So can I ask a question following up with that? Mm-hmm. So let's say you're talking with that mom who lost her son in that really tragic way. Is there something you can say to her that can comfort her in that moment? Like if somebody comes to me and says, God took away my child, or this happened to me because God's punishing me, what's a simple thing that I can say to them to comfort them and let them know the truth?
Yeah, and I'll give you the answer I gave to the mom because this is a real world example. I told her a couple of things. I said, God gave his only son. He did not even spare his own son so that your son could have life eternal someday. The second thing I said was, as Christians, we believe that God is all good. And we want God to be in control of things. And he always makes the right decision. And the decision is he doesn't want death for people. In fact, he shows the opposite. He died in order to bring life to all people. Why would he then go and kill them? And the third one is just, I said, look, sometimes people say dumb things when they want to comfort you. They say things that they think are helpful, which what they really should be is silent, right? Is that sometimes we want to help and we want to go, they're fishing in heaven, or God needed this from you. Just say, look, I'm here for you. I love you. And what I told her is I said, God's heart breaks just like yours does. Mm-hmm.
Really good stuff. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I really loved that you came up with this question when we first were sitting down talking about, all right, what questions do we have for the pastor? Because these were the questions I had during a season of my life. And if I could be transparent with you guys real quick, I grew up in a Christian household. Later on in life, found out what it's like to be an authentic Christian. It's a huge difference between the two. But after high school, I stopped going to church. My friends didn't go to church anymore. There was still some cool people at church, but there were still some not so cool people at church, so church really wasn't my priority. Fast forward a little bit, I found myself in a position where I was very suicidal. And I just had a lot of questions that were so relatable to this one. And at that time in my life, I was working in hospitality, and some people were like, hey, come take this class, come do this thing, and I pushed it off for like a year or two. And eventually, I finally just was like, all right, let's go do the class, because I just didn't want to listen to people trying to get me to do this class anymore. And it was a biblical counseling class that they actually held here at the church. And I was like, all right, cool, so maybe I'll broaden my communication skills a little bit, and if I'm lucky, I'll get a little bit of Jesus out of this. Oh my gosh, I got slapped across the soul. It was a very interesting...
Not physically, we don't slap people here. Just in case you're wondering.
It's like exorcisms at the church. It was just a class that teaches you how to counsel people, and I ended up being counseled myself in that class. And it really just weighed down on me which is my question, why is it so important to go to church?
Yeah, and one, Jimmy, thanks for being, transparent. I mean, it takes a lot of guts to be up here and talk about suicidal thoughts. I mean, mental health, our society is just coming around that these are real problems with people that have these problems. And so for a long time, people didn't want to hear about them, or they thought there was just something wrong with them. So thanks for sharing first. I think part of the answer to this question is a bit of a nuance. I think church is important, and I'm going to get to that. But the short answer to this question is I think the important part of church is it's the largest grouping of accountability you can get. You can be free to be authentic, your authentic self. You're accepted exactly as you are, but we love you too much to allow you to stay that way. And so I want to answer this question in a couple different ways real quick. Is that first, most people don't have a problem with Jesus. They have a problem with church. And the reason they have a problem with church is because they're people in church. And so I don't know if you know this, but he said there are not cool people in church. That's an understatement. I have a friend that says if you want to find all the hypocrites on the planet, erect four walls and put up a cross. And that's very true. And so part of the beauty of a Christian community is the fact that we go in going, we can't do this on our own. That's the big deal. It's the acknowledgement of being broken. It's not the avoidance of it. It's the acknowledgement of it. And what's interesting is Jesus highlights this in Mark chapter 2. Jesus is going around. People are talking with him. They realize he's something special. And they kind of ask him why he has the company that he does. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, a tax collector, you didn't like tax collectors today, they hated them back then, and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And then when the teachers of the law, the religious people, if you can read it that way, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked him, hey, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And on hearing this, Jesus says, look, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous people, but sinners. And he basically says, look, look, if you were all good and you didn't need me, there'd be no reason for me to be here. And so he says, I'm here not for the righteous people, but sinners. And that was 100% of all people, just in case you were wondering. And so he basically said, look, the reason that I'm hanging out with all of these people is these are the exact people that I relate to. These are the people who want me the most because they know that they're broken. So I think part of the reason that church, the biggest reason, is that it's going, I can be exactly who I am right now. I can tell them all of my faults. I can tell them who I am and what I have done, and they don't recoil and leave the room. They go, yeah, I've been there. I know exactly what you're going through. Be here with us. We will help you. And then there's a second reason for this, and this actually has to deal with the word church, which has had like this horrible history. I don't know if you know this, but the word church comes from a Greek word called ecclesia, and it originally meant an assembly of people. When Jesus began the church, he didn't have a vision of a building. It was a gathering of people. In fact, in the first century, it was often illegal to be a Christian. Like they were rounded up and killed and put in chains. And so they didn't have a building that they could just go to a street corner and be like, hey, we all meet here on Tuesdays. They couldn't do that. And so it was about the people who gathered. And then later on, ironically, about 313 years later, the Roman Empire, again, ironically, because they were responsible for overseeing the crucifixion of Jesus, Christianity becomes the dominant religion in Rome. And then you have the Roman Catholic Church that is just coming to power. And over the years, the church became more and more institutionalized. And when you give any person or organization too much power, they often use it poorly. That includes Christians. And so what happened is the leaders of the church, people who had initially good desires, begin to solidify their power into one area. And they said, we need people to come to us for answers, and we need to make sure the church, the building, because there was a big real building in Rome, is the center of power. So they took out the word ecclesia and they kept it in there, but they turned it into a different meaning for it, and they put in a German word, Kirche, which meant a physical location. So they took Jesus' heart of saying, I want to start a movement of people that say, I want to join that group. I want to be a part of them. They're different. There's something different about them. And they changed Christianity into a building that you went to. And the best way I could describe it is people move, buildings don't. That was the big difference. And so people started to go to a building and they forgot that Jesus was about the people, not a physical location. So one of the things I think that's, in addition to a place of accountability is to say you're joining a group of people with maybe varying different beliefs, but with one goal, for you to know and love God most. And that's why I think church is so important. It's not coming here in a physical location, it's the people that you're with. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, man. So my question, it kind of stems off of that first story. I was in 7th grade. I was sitting there with all my classmates trying to figure out how we can take down this teacher. And it's like all I cared about that year. I don't even know if I took math. And while I was sitting there plotting our ways that we were going to do this, we got a few of the guys together and we opened our Bible, and we noticed we had different religions there, and I was like, dude, their Bible is different than mine. What happened? Like, am I missing something? And I was like kind of jealous because he had more books. I was like, dude, I got shorted. Like, what happened here? So I guess my decision is, who decided which books would become a part of the Bible, and which books were left out?
Again, another softball. I appreciate this. This is awesome. There's going to be some technical terms here I'm going to talk about. So which books in the Bible, and I'm going to try to go through these quickly. I would love your questions afterward, but let's get a couple of things clear to help us formulate this conversation. The Protestant Bible, I'm going to use that term specifically, and you'll find out for a reason. Bible simply means book. It's a Greek translation of biblos. There's a Latin translation also, but they just kind of mean book. So when people say, what does the Bible mean? It literally just means book. It is a collection of books, narrative, poetry, letters, and all that sort of stuff. But it's synonymous with Scripture and the Word of God. When people say that, they're all the same thing. And so a couple of quick facts. The Protestant Bible has 66 books. 39 are in the Old Testament. Testament just means covenant. So your Bible is kind of divided into half, not by length, but by covenant. A covenant just kind of means that it's like an agreement. And so the Old Testament was between God and a specific people in a specific time. And then the New Testament is between God, all people, for all time. And so that's kind of how your Bible is divided. And so in the Old Testament, they kind of had this process where by the time Jesus gets on the scene, the Old Testament is kind of set. Moses writes the first 5 books of the Bible, a bunch of different people write all the rest, and by the time of Jesus, everyone is quoting Old Testament scripture. So that part is settled. And then when Jesus gets on the scene, he does his ministry thing for 3 years, and then the church starts, and then the movement starts to explode. And a bunch of different people, start to gather and they start to become churches. And what they realize is they didn't have some basic answers to these questions. They didn't go, hey, who do we worship? How do we worship? What is expected of me? What does it mean to be a Christian? And so the people who followed Jesus around had to say, look, we need to tell them who he was, what he was like, and what he said. So the New Testament writers, the people who followed Jesus around, begin to write eyewitness accounts. Matthew, John, and Mark write eyewitness accounts. Luke is a historian. They wrote a lot of the New Testament. And then later on, a guy named Paul, who converts to Christianity, writes all the letters. He plants all these churches, and then he writes all these letters. But then there's all these other writings that he's talking about. And there's a couple different ways, and there's going to be 2 things on the screen here in just a second. But they're called the rejects. And there's one called the pseudepigrapha. Pseudo means false. Those are false writings. And then there's also the apocrypha. Apocryph just basically means hidden. And so there's this intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament where stuff just isn't written. And so there's some authors who wrote these things. And then we get to a certain place in time where people go, we've got all these writings from the Apostle Paul, from the witnesses of Jesus, and then all these people who have these claims. How do we determine which ones are authentic? Because they said, we want to put the Old Testament and the New Testament together. We want to formulate them, put them all in one place. How do we decide what goes in? And so I'm going to give you 5 criteria here. This is the process. This isn't just an exhaustive list, but you have to have at least the presence of all of these for a book to get in. So here's a couple of them. Authority, divine authorship. Did God inspire the book through the writers? Meaning when you read the words on this page, do they seem to come alive? Is it more than just like, hey, this is just a great piece of literature? It's more than that. Apostolicity, and that's just a fancy word for saying there's a human assistance, and were they a prophet or an apostle of God? And the third one kind of goes along with it. How do you tell if they're an apostle from God? Well, in order to give them integrity and credibility, they had to prove, they had to do something out of the ordinary. So the Old Testament prophets always did something miraculous where people go, we could tell that you're from God because no one could stop the sun. No one could part the sea. No one could bring people back from the dead. In the New Testament, they healed people. They performed miraculous signs and wonders. In fact, people even questioned Jesus. Prove to us that you are from God. Agreement is another one. The books had to agree with what was already written in the Old Testament, and from the writings of Paul, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had to agree with that too. And then the 5th one is acceptance, is that people, when they took all of these into account, did they say, yes, we do accept these as the writings of God? We actually have an example of that in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. So there's a lot more that goes on to this, about this, and so if you need some more information about this, there's a huge book I read about this, and it's hard to condense in a couple minutes, but hopefully that'll give you a good start. I think we got time for another question.
Yeah. Okay, so a really crazy thing happened to me a few weeks ago, or maybe it's like a month or 2 ago. So I'm at a UPS store, and this guy comes up to me, and he starts telling me some things about myself, and some things about God, and some things about what he believes about what I believe, and making some assumptions that just didn't sit right with me. And I wasn't really sure what to say, so I kind of just stood there and stared at him and then started crying.
Great reaction.
That's just the truth, y'all. And so my question is, how can I talk about God with people who belong to a different religion?
You open up with, you're entitled to be wrong. It's always a great approach right there. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that in your marriage either. It's horrible. If you ever try that one, it's like, it's so bad.
note to
I want
self.
to give you a couple quick tips on this. I mean, I actually love doing this. I love talking about people of different religions because one, I like to find some common ground, and two, I kind of want to discover why do they believe the things that they do. So I'm going to give you just a couple quick tips. First is be confident in what you believe and be curious about what they believe. You shouldn't just go, everything you believe is utter nonsense, because that's not true. Every religion in the world has at least a shred of truth, and so to discount that would not be correct. In fact, if you know that almost every religion in the world has an account of the flood, and so it's this amazing event that happened that people all over the globe recorded to one way or another. And so we want to be curious about what they believe. Don't see them as a project. Please do not do that. It's so annoying to me when Christians say, I've got a person I'm working on. It's like, stop. They're not a project. Like, you have a person you're friends with that you're talking about Jesus with. Like, do that. You know, it's just like, once you're finished, do you like put them on a shelf somewhere? Like, what happens to them? They're not a project. So please don't do them. Just see them as a person. They have emotions and thoughts and a history and a background. Please honor that. Don't do that. Third, ask a lot of questions. See if you can find common ground. You know, sometimes we just miss each other, and if we're curious about what they believe, sometimes we can find a place to go, okay, you believe that, you know, everything started from a singular point. Let me tell you what we believe in Christianity about that. Ask them why. This may be the best question to ask, honestly. Why they believe they do and how they came to that conclusion. Often the answer will surprise you. Sometimes it's just like, well, my parents believe this, or I read it in an online chat room. You're like, well, that's a great place, you know, to find, you know, the answer to life. You know, how did you come to this conclusion? Sometimes people have never asked them that question. They go, I believe this. Well, why do you believe that? You know, when people ask me why I'm a Christian, they think it's because I'm a pastor. I said, no. I think the evidence suggests more than likely that there is a God and that he revealed himself through Jesus Christ. I think the evidence supports that. And so I would love to talk about that evidence with you if you would like to, and that throws them off guard because it's not just like I believe it because it feels good. That's not it. Another one, tell them about the hope that you have, not the answers that you have. Those two things are different. In fact, in 1 Peter, a lot of people take this out of context. Always be ready with an answer. That's not what it says. It says always be ready to answer with the hope that you have. The reason we believe in Jesus Christ is not because we have good answers, it's because he gives us hope. Hope for here and now and for all of eternity. And everyone needs hope. I've never met a person on this planet that doesn't need hope in their life here and now and beyond. And then if permissible and with kindness, tell them about Jesus. Don't hit them over the head with the cross, please. You know, earn their respect, earn the right to talk to them about Jesus. And I think we can get to this one. Let's try to get to the last one.
Oh, cool. So with the question I have, it kind of brings it back to church. And the reason I'm asking it is because the question itself is worship more than a song? And I ask that question because I remember coming to church as a young kid or even recently, a couple years ago. And when you hear the word worship, you're like, oh, that's when before service starts and they sing some songs and it's kind of awkward sometimes. But there's some people putting their hands up. And I actually had students over in the high school ministries ask me the same question. So I really would just love what is worship more than a song?
Yeah, I think it is. You know, what's funny is if you come to any of our service, you notice that our worship leaders, the people who are up here say, we're going to sing some songs. And why do they say that? Well, singing songs, you know what that means? It means you're singing songs. There's just no other way to talk about that. And worship is honoring, praising, and revering God because of who he is. The reason we bring these two out is because there are people in this room and throughout churches in America and throughout the world who are not worshiping God. They're not. They don't necessarily believe he exists, or if they do believe he exists, they don't necessarily follow him. And so for us to ask you to worship something would be inappropriate. And so we try to do the best we can. We have the guest in mind. And so we love, talking about God. We don't tailor our content, but we do tailor our approach. We want people to feel like, man, if I'm not a Christian, I can still belong here before I believe what they say. So part of the reason we say sing songs is because we want to be inclusive. We don't assume that you're worshiping God. We're trying to honor your position. You do not have to be like us. It is your choice. We hope to entice you. We hope to give you the evidence. And we hope that at the end of the day, your decision is to honor God, not because we tell you to. In fact, if you were to ask what our goal is on a Sunday, you actually might be surprised. It sounds so generic, but I want to give it to you guys. If you come on a Sunday, here's our goal. We hope you say, I liked the experience, I felt connected, and I want to come back. There is no Jesus in that sentence, but no one would come and accuse us and say we never talk about Jesus. The thing is, our approach is to go, we want you to really like it. We think church should be fun and engaging. We want you to feel connected to people first, but hopefully we want to connect you to God. And then thirdly, we just want you to say, look, I liked everything. I actually do want to come back. That wasn't boring at all or anything like that. And our music choice and stuff like that. I mean, there's so many opinions about music, loud, soft, good, bad, and we do the best we can to provide a great experience for people as much as possible. So there is a difference between worship and singing songs. Christians worship and everyone else sings songs, but the great thing is when you're in a room together, you're all singing, and it all kind of makes us one group. So we got through all of them. Thanks for being here today. I want to give you two quick things. Make sure to register for Impact Women. If you want to register for the Headline Series class, please do that. We're about 75% full. Pick up your kids. Please do that. Don't leave. And then if you have a question, come down to the front. We'll see you. Have a great Sunday.